Well, welcome back to day 2 of the Conference on Economics of Digital Services. We did all the welcomes yesterday, so we'll wait for the close today to do the pleasantries. The last word from yesterday, which was not said during the public session, is data. The first word for today is daisy. And on that note, I hand off the podium to Mark Scheffer for his paper on algorithms in the wild.
So yes, thank you very much for this introduction. Before I start the presentation, I would like to thank the organizers and the institutions behind that organize this event. I'm very grateful to be here. It has been a fantastic event so far, and I'm looking forward to all other presentations today. I'm also, of course, thanking the funders. I think it's fair to say, without your financial support, we would today be in an entirely different situation. So this is joint work with people that I met during my time in Bologna. So Vito is a PhD student at the University of Bologna. Emilio is now a professor at the University of Rome. Back then, when I was in Bologna, he was a professor there. And Giacomo Calzolari is a professor at the European University Institute in Florence. So the motivation for this work is that in recent years, with the advent of digitization and online marketplaces, we have witnessed the increased adoption of repricing software. Now, repricing software, generally speaking, is software that allows a seller to set prices automatically as a function of the prices of the rivals. Okay? Now, there are two, broad kinds of repricing software, if you like. There are two main types. The first type is what we call mechanical repricing software. So this software basically allows you to automatically monitor the marketplace and to specify a certain fixed pricing rule. For instance, you could say, I would like to undercut my rival whenever my rival changes the price. Please immediately implement a new lower price. Okay? Then the second broad strand of repricing technology is repricing technology that, and this is at least what the sellers of this repricing technology claim, use artificial intelligence. Okay? So when you hear the word artificial intelligence, and if you take the intelligence bit seriously, right, you might of course be concerned that artificial intelligence algorithms might be able to autonomously learn sophisticated pricing strategies and end up, learning collusive strategies in some sense and imposing super competitive prices in marketplaces. Okay? So, in fact, there is already work out there by Emilio, Giacomo, and co-authors that basically shows that in theory, right, it is possible that if you let two artificial intelligence algorithms play against each other, they might be able to learn sophisticated pricing strategies, they might be able to learn collusive strategies. Okay? Now, so we know that in theory it is possible, however, right, this is a simulation study, and the simulation study can of course afford in some sense to ignore some issues that in the real world, engineers that design pricing software cannot afford to ignore, right? So, in the background, there's still this question looming, is it actually realistic to expect that commercial repricing software is able to learn collusive strategies? Okay? And what we set out to do in this research is essentially we try to answer this question or to shed light on this question. Okay? Now, before I move on, I would like to back up a little, right? And I would like to remind you, or I would like to point out, that algorithmic pricing is likely to affect markets in various ways, even if you remove the artificial intelligence part from the equation. Okay? So, for one thing, and this is probably quite trivial, what we should expect is we should expect an increased frequency of price changes. Okay? Then, what is also something interesting to think about is that, of course, now we have marketplaces where human sellers that don't use repricing software are confronted with sellers that use repricing software, and this in itself also has implications. Okay? Then the third point is that if you think about this carefully, and this is something that we in some sense realized while doing the project, right? Using repricing software in some sense changes the strategy space of the seller, right? A human seller that cannot afford to monitor the price, the market cheaply, right, has in some sense to think about an optimal price. if you have the technology of reprices at your hand, what you have to think about is an optimal pricing strategy. Okay? And I hope that during the course of my talk, it will become clear why this in itself might have implications, interesting implications. Okay, and that we should think about these things carefully as economists. And the last part is essentially what motivated this research. So this is what we had in the back of our mind, right? We want to understand whether we should take artificial intelligence seriously and whether it's likely to implement super competitive processes. Okay, so, but I think it's important to keep in mind that there are also other aspects that are interesting to think about. And yes, so what we want to do is we want to, in some sense, think about a systematic protocol, right, to map the capabilities of repricing software. Okay, and I will explain, of course, during this talk how we aim to do this. And in some sense, and this is of course a long-term goal, and we will probably only be able to contribute a minor contribution, but it's basically this overarching topic of how we could audit our work. Okay? Now, what is the general approach that we take? The general approach that we take is that we create real seller accounts on an online marketplace, okay? And we engage in real sales activities. So we expose ourselves to all the real-world limitations that people have to face when they want to implement repricing software in the real world, okay? And what we also do is that we deploy our own repricing software on this online marketplace. And what we aim to do with this is essentially we aim to use our own repricing software to be able to simulate different market environments in some sense, and to tease out how the artificial intelligence of commercial reprices is able to react to this simulated environment, right? And this is essentially what we will use to basically develop a protocol to test the sophistication of repricing software. Okay? Now, the outline of the talk is the following. I will talk about technical background that is important to understand to basically appreciate the strategy that we choose in order to elicit the sophistication of repricing software. Then I will talk quite a bit about our experimental design, which is still preliminary. Of course, the results are also preliminary, but I will be happy to show what we have so far. And then I will basically provide you with the challenges that lie still ahead of us. And of course, I hope that you will all have fantastic ideas to help us overcome these challenges. Any questions so far? No? So, we operate in online marketplaces, okay, and today I'm not going to say which online marketplace, but what is very common in online marketplaces is that usually you have something that is an advertised seller, okay? In the context of Amazon, this is called the buy box seller, right? So generally, when you look for a product on an online marketplace, you will be directed to a product page where you see an image of the product and you see a price. And the price that you see, and that is very salient, is the advertised seller price. Right? And we will call this the advertised seller position. Okay? Now, especially, so, and usually, products are sold by multiple sellers, right? But the other sellers that are not in the advertised seller position, you will have a hard time, let's say, as a consumer to find them, right? Because they are hidden behind a small link and it's less salient, so it's quite unlikely that you will buy from the non-advertised seller. Now, particularly I'm very well aware that in the case of Amazon, where there is a lot of controversy about the algorithm that selects who gets in the advertised seller position or who gets in the buy box in the case of Amazon. And the only thing that I can say is that in our experiment, in our setting, right, the advertised seller position is almost certainly only determined by who has the cheapest price. If you have the cheapest price, you end up in the advertised seller position. Okay? And yes, non-advertised sellers are basically accessible through a less salient. Okay, so you can think about it as an almost perfect instance of platform the market environment that we have on the market. Now, let me talk a little bit about what we call this off-the-shelf repricing industry, right? So we call it off-the-shelf reprices because really, from the perspective of a seller that operates on Amazon, it's extremely easy on Amazon, but also on eBay, on other platforms. It's really easy to go out in the internet, look for reprices, look at what they offer in some sense, and then if you decided to use one of these reprices, you can basically buy it, perform a couple of clicks, and within half an hour you have the repricer running. Okay? So it's really, an off-the-shelf solution. And then Usually these repricers offer you several things at the same time, so you can either decide to play a mechanical repricing rule, like undercut your rival, or you can basically use one artificial intelligence repricer that they offer, right? And I'm just, pointing out, I just selected two random, typical marketing materials that I found on this website. So the two aspects that they always emphasize is the following: we are fast and we are smart, right? Our repricer is the fastest, our repricer is the smartest, okay? Just want to, just for your information, this is essentially the two dimensions that they basically compete on in some sense. And of course, the price, but speed seems to be an enormous issue in this market. Then a rather technical detail, but that is very important to appreciate, to understand the strategy.
Can I just ask a quick comment? How do the repricers make money? Do you pay them?
You pay them usually a fixed monthly fee, the subscription-based model. The interesting thing is that usually you can use them they have a free trial period, sometimes even for 2 months or 14 days. And it's extremely easy for a seller that operates in online marketplaces. Really extremely easy to install.
One thing for you to maybe think about is what does that do to their incentives?
Yes, no, sure, that's definitely true. So some of them actually also charge a share of the revenue, but that's uncommon, right? The vast majority basically charge a fixed monthly subscription. But so far we didn't think about their incentives. It's true, we should probably.
You think of a case where they're all colluding, and it's basically at that point that okay, all the repricing are the same.
Mm-hmm.
They want to differentiate themselves somewhat, so that might actually create for them an incentive to maybe not.
Yeah, that's true.
Perfectly collude. But anyway.
Is there a large price range of these prices?
Yes, so there are some that are really cheap, right, that you can operate from, I would say, $40 a month or 40 euros a month. And then there are some that are actually quite expensive. And there are some that basically, interestingly, want to know things about you when you go for the repricing software. And they will try to set up a call with you. They will try to understand what you need. They will try to understand how many products you sell. And it's actually difficult. So sometimes they refuse to offer you the service, right? This one. So yes. So for the moment, we basically really stick with those that no questions asked. We can install the software and we go for it. So yes. Oh, I didn't talk about the prices. Let's see. So what is very important to understand in this type of market is that usually on these online platforms, what is the case is that you can not basically change the prices arbitrarily quickly, right? If you set a price, you are stuck with this price for at least 5 months, okay? And this has important consequences, as you will see. So it introduces some form of price commitment, right? So if you basically just set the price, you cannot override it immediately, okay? You're stuck with this price. And it creates a first mover advantage that we will basically exploit to establish a benchmark strategy against a certain competitor.
But earlier you said we should be thinking of Bertrand competition, but with Bertrand I want to move second, not first.
Sorry?
With Bertrand I want to move second, not first, right? So what am I missing in the setup?
Well, I'm thinking about, when I'm talking about Bertrand competition, I'm basically thinking about the scenario with human sellers, right? Where you basically select prices simultaneously. Why would you like to, so you would like to move second because you can basically undercut the rival?
Yes, right.
Okay.
In the textbook version.
Okay, in the textbook version. Yeah, okay, so then just, allow me to progress and then we will see why we would like to, we would like to move first, or why we might like it.
Can you tell us a little bit about what sellers know about other sellers? Do I know, can I scrape the site and get everybody else's prices?
So yes, so this repricing the technologies and our own repricer, they use dedicated APIs, right? And each online marketplace has an API, and you can basically usually extract more information than just the price, right? So some of these repricers, they basically say, when your competitor runs out of stock or is close to running out of stock, we will do something special with your products, right? So there seems to be information, right? We are not able, with our own software, to see the stock of the rival, but some repricers make that claim, right? So it's a very opaque environment. This APIs, sometimes the documentations are not good, and it's very hard to understand, even if you invest a lot of time, what they actually provide for information and what you need to do. So we hired a software developer that basically, build the software that allows you to interact with the online marketplaces, and he said he had a terrible time finding out about all
I mean, it seems like it's gonna be challenging to model the strategic environment if I don't know what my rivals know even. Like, I don't know, do they have the same boat as me or?
So we will go step by step, and we first take a very straightforward approach. And what we say is like essentially what you want to be. You want to be the seller that is basically in the advertised seller position. Okay, that's your goal for the moment, right? And we think of the parameters that the seller usually can say, okay, I have a maximum price, I have a minimum price, right? And within this bandwidth, I let the repricer operate, right? Be it a mechanic repricer or an artificial intelligence repricer, right? Now you can think of it essentially that the seller might think about what are his marginal costs, right? What is the theoretical monopoly price, and let the repricer do the work in between, okay? So, and then the repricer, and then it's, I think, fairly straightforward to argue that then what the repricer basically aims to do, right, is basically to stay in the advertised seller position at, presumably a high price, okay? So, so now I want to talk about the strategic environment, and I want to talk about the experimental protocol that we will implement, right? So, as I already said, like the advertised seller position based on the cheapest price creates an environment that you might characterize as platform competition, right? So with human players, basically, the way I think about it is a human player looks at the marketplace. He knows basically his Bertrand competition. He knows his marginal costs. He knows perhaps that it's a symmetric environment, and what he would do, or at least what theory would basically predict that he will do, is he will set prices equal to marginal cost, and then he will walk away and basically let demand play out, right? Now, if you have algorithms, right, something that seems quite plausible to do is to say, well, I have a technology that allows me to monitor the marketplaces all the time. Let's just, play a mechanical Bertrand pricing, right? Whenever, for some reason, somebody sets a price that is higher than my marginal cost, just undercut him slightly, otherwise set the price equal to the marginal cost, okay? So I think that this is, a very reasonable first order thing to think about if you think about these marketplaces, right? So in some sense, a very straightforward repricing rule that is, in fact, right, the ad hoc rule that most of the repricers offer is basically this type of strategy, right? If you don't want to think too hard about the problem that you have at hand, simply play Bertrand, think about what are your marginal costs and presumably what is your monopoly price, and let the repricer operate into this range, and whenever, maybe your rival exits the market, you set monopoly prices and you get a free lunch, okay? And of course, a human seller cannot do it as easily because he would have to sit in front of a screen all the time and monitor the market, and of course nobody does that. Okay? So this already changed the strategic environment, right? Now, what we thought when we did the project is, okay, so if this is something straightforward to do, you would assume that if people offer artificial intelligence reprices or algorithms, you should be able to achieve something better, right? Because otherwise, there's not really a point.
Can you say something about the time dimensions of this strategy? Should I think about the algorithm continuously monitoring the competitors' prices and changing it as soon as there's a switch, or does the algorithm do it at fixed intervals?
That's so the algorithm. So the way we understand it is that usually there's a technology that basically will allow the platform to push price changes through you, right? and then you can basically react to this price change. Right?
So-
Everyone in the marketplace that has an API is informed this seller changed the price. Okay. There is this solution. There's also the solution to basically monitor the marketplace at small time intervals. Let's say every 30 seconds you basically swipe the marketplace, you look at all if everything, if something changes, and then you implement the price change.
Because the reason I'm asking, usually we don't think that it, in practice would matter, but this starts to look a lot like, whether you have a repeated game where the decision making is staggered or simultaneous, and then you're basically playing a Markov strategy with conditions of the current prices, and there's the work by masking and Tirol that shows you can get all kinds of cycles coming out of that if it's staggered, and in a simultaneous world you wouldn't expect that. So this small difference is going to make a big difference potentially.
Yeah, no, that's true. So the interesting thing is that usually price changes are implemented simultaneously.
Okay.
At least in the online marketplace that we are looking at right now, right? So not always, right? There are all these technical issues, sometimes not. Most of the time it is implemented simultaneously. You will see price changes occurring at the same time. Okay? So, now, think about a player that decides to play Bertrand, right? And think about a player that knows that there is a player that decides to play Bertrand. Right, now what is the best response to a Bertrand player, right? And now what I would argue is you do the following. You set a high price, right? And then Bertrand will undercut. Then you lower your own price, and now what happens is the following. You know there's a Bertrand player. He only reacts to your price, right? You know that you will undercut this new price that you set. So if you want to prevent him from his strategy becoming effective against you, you simply lower your price again, right? Then you stay in the advertised seller position. And you basically continue this, you cycle down, right? Or basically you lower your prices continuously until you reach a minimum price, right? And when you reach the minimum price, you reset to the maximum price and you run the game again, right? It's a myopic strategy in the sense that the only thing that you think about is, okay, how in the next step, do I gain the advertised seller position, so you don't think much about the future. But this will, pretty much guarantee you the advertised seller position most of the times. Okay? So, in some sense, this is how it plays out. So, we call this strategy that I just described the relentless cycling strategy because essentially it induces relentless price cycles, right? You go down and then you reset and then you go down and then you reset. Okay? So this is how it plays out, right? So the red dashed line is essentially the Bertrand strategy. The black line is the relentless cycling strategy, right? And this is the sequence of events how it will happen, right? You basically always preempt the Bertrand from becoming effective. You know by how much he undercuts you, you just preempt the strategy.
But the reason you get the cycle is because you assume everybody has the same cost. But if you have a lower cost than mine, which is going to absorb to a state where you beat me all the time, you get the margin, which is the.
Well, it depends on how on where the monopoly price lies. It's not. I don't think that it's that straightforward to answer, right? So if you have, so here in this picture, the same cost is of course important, right? Let's say the relentless cycler has slightly lower costs, right? You might still, get something between the monopoly price and the costs, right? And most of the time, something that is way higher than your marginal cost by playing this strategy, right? So I don't say that we fully characterize the game here, right? I'm just saying that as a benchmark, this is an interesting strategy to think about.
No, I guess I'm just thinking that if your cost was lower than mine, then it seems like.
Sorry?
I'm just saying that if this asymmetry in the cost was sufficiently big, I
Yes.
would just expect you to beat me, and I would just not be able to make money in the market. So the symmetry seems to be an important
No,
part
of course.
the story, right?
Of course. The symmetry here is of course important. I mean, of course, they are like, the Bertrand strategy also might simply decide to stick to the minimum price, and then essentially this strategy becomes right? But, as a matter of fact, if you look at prices and if you see algorithmic players in the marketplace, seeing these price cycles, right, that look like edge-rough cycles, but that in fact are not edge-rough cycles because they are way too regular, right? You often see this happen. You see something like this happening. You see cycling happening, right? That's very, very common. So And again, our goal here is to devise essentially a protocol to test the intelligence of artificial intelligence. Okay? But what is already interesting here is that if you take essentially the model premises seriously, so that we have symmetric marginal costs, right? What you see is that if somebody plays Bertrand and somebody plays the best response to Bertrand, you end up having super competitive prices, right? And so,
Do you see a collusion issue?
sorry?
Do you see a collusion issue?
No, I just see that if you have two mechanical pricing rules that interact with each other, right? And even if they might, not have collusion in mind, you already get something that is quite different from the scenario where you have humans playing against you. But that's not. I don't really see a collusion issue, right? It's not necessarily. Okay. So so let me summarize. But of course, relentless cycling versus Bertrand is not a Nash equilibrium, right? I would say the best response to the Bertrand strategy leads to super competitive price. Of course, if I say Bertrand here, I mean the Bertrand strategy, the delegated Bertrand strategy that I just talked about. Okay? And if you have two players that implement a Bertrand best response, you have symmetric costs, and one of them decides to reset the cycle once he hits his marginal costs, you already end up with with higher prices than you would expect with human interaction. Okay? And this is the bit that I said is interesting, right? Even if you remove artificial intelligence from the equation, you have something here already that is, quite prone to super competitive prices. Okay. Yes. So, and then of course, I want to emphasize that this relentless cycling strategy is a myopic strategy, right? It doesn't have. It has some sort of, there is some sort of intertemporal consideration in the sense that you preempt the price move, but it's not really, explicit in the objective function of the algorithm. So now our own artificial intelligence software is an XP3 algorithm, right? So I don't want to bore you with the details. I'm also not a computer scientist by training. We decided to go for the XP3 algorithm because it seems to be a very popular algorithm in the computer science literature. It's a very straightforward to implement algorithm, right? And essentially, at a very high level, what you do is you specify an action space, right? And at the beginning, the algorithm plays each action with the same probability. And then over time, loosely speaking, right, he learns to play the action that provided him the highest rewards in the past. Okay, very, very loosely. So he implements, in some sense, a mixed strategy, right? And so what we do is essentially we say, okay, the XP3 can decide to lower the price by 4 cents, by 2 cents, to stay at the same price, right? Or to increase the price by 2 cents or 4 cents. And we want him to learn essentially what is the optimal probability to play each action when he's confronted with a Bertrand. Okay? Now, you might say, okay, the positive prices are you can already remove them from the set because you should never play them, right? But we will also implement our XP3 algorithm against a commercial repricer, and essentially we want to introduce the possibility to raise prices because this is maybe something that would be necessary to implement collusive strategies. Okay, and we just want to see, does the commercial repricer actually pick up that our repricer raises prices occasionally, and let them. So we want to create this option at least. Okay. So now this is our setup. Okay. So what we do is in the first experiment that we run is basically we let the Bertrand strategy play against the relentless cycler to set the benchmark because, as I argued, the relentless cycling strategy is in some sense the best response to the Bertrand strategy. Okay. Then we let the Bertrand strategy play against the commercial repricer. We let the Bertrand strategy play against our own repricer, right? And we want to see how close do both artificial intelligence algorithms basically come to the benchmark implied by the relentless cycling, right? And then basically as a sort of final of the tournament, if you like, okay, we let our XP3 algorithms play against the commercial repricer. okay? Just in some sense to validate our findings, and I will explain what I mean by this, okay? So the general setting is the following. So this is a pilot study, right? Not everything worked out 100%, but in general, we said that the Bertrand, we instruct the Bertrand algorithm to undercut rivals' prices by 2 cents, okay? We operate in a price range between 2 and 2.65, right? So the maximum price that we set is 2.65, the minimum price that we set is 2. And each experiment lasted for approximately 1.5 days because we train our algorithm online, right? So we need to give you some time to basically find that. How am I doing on time? Okay. So this is the result of basically the benchmark setup, right? Where you have the Bertrand strategy playing against the relentless cycling strategy. What you see on the left-hand side is the share of the advertised seller position that the relentless cycler is able to achieve, okay? The red line shows you the theoretical optimum, right? That you can basically calculate. I did an example calculation basically here, right? So if you have k steps going down with the relentless cycling strategy, you will basically guarantee yourself k minus 1 over k, share of the advertised seller position, and the Bertrand will only get the rest, okay? Namely, when you reset the cycle, Bertrand will be in the advertised seller position. Yes. So, and you see he doesn't quite reach it. And why is this the case? Well, it's the case because the real world is messy, and sometimes, price changes are simply not implemented, and it takes a little bit longer than expected. And all of this introduces, in some sense, some inefficiencies that allow the Bertrand to sometimes be successful when he should not, right? And here on the right side, you see one cycle down, right, of playing this strategy, and what you have is essentially exactly what we would kind of expect, right? The relentless cycle stays cheaper.
Why does the Bertrand pop up?
Yeah, so that's what I said. It's still still early stage, right? So there is another seller there that is sitting at 265, and apparently he picked up this seller and decided I go and undercut this seller. In fact, he shouldn't, right? By the way, in here we used the commercial repricer to implement the Bertrand strategy, right? So it's a commercial repricer that is not well coded up in some sense, and then is making a mistake. We should go after our cycling strategy. And okay, so it works. Okay, that's essentially the message from this picture. It works, basically achieving what it should. Now the commercial repricer is actually very bad, right? And so they claim they use artificial intelligence and so on and so forth, and you put this commercial repricer against a simple Bertrand strategy, and he doesn't achieve to get even like 50% of the advertised seller position, right? Now you might say, hold on, it's important that you weight by prices, right? I don't show the results here, but even if you weight everything by prices, nothing changed. You simply underperform, right? So you can basically forget about this commercial repricer, but I will qualify what I say here, because maybe we are too quick in judging the repricer just from these findings. And then let's let our XP3 play against the Bertrand strategy, right? And essentially, the XP3 algorithm is able to learn something that comes close to the relentless cycling strategy. Okay? So in the beginning, he has close to 50% of the advertised seller position, and then over time it increases, right? And he reaches the benchmark. And here on the right-hand side, you see essentially the weights that he's learning to play. Okay? So over time, he learns to undercut the rival by 4 cents, right? He does this automatically. Every 5 minutes, he has to take a new decision, right? I go down, I go down, I go down. And since we instructed him to reset the prices once he hits the minimum, he's essentially implementing the relentless cycling. So he's doing something that comes close to the relentless cycling strategy, okay? And as you can see, the probabilities to play the actions evolve as you would expect.
So, all of this, you're just looking at their sales position, you're not actually looking at sales.
Yeah, exactly. We ignore demand, but we have good reason to believe that the commercial repricers are not able to learn demand, not yet. Right. So how we think about the problem is you are a seller, you know the demand environment, you know approximately, you know what is the price range of reasonable prices. Let's say your monopoly price and your marginal cost, and you delegate a pricing strategy to basically achieve the highest possible price in this price range.
So I would have thought that, okay, I don't know what you mean.
The highest possible price in the advertised seller position.
Yeah, but you could see the sales of, whoever you're working with, right?
Yes, we could. Yeah. We could, but we want to start simple. So we can estimate the demand function, we have all the tools to do it.
I'm not saying estimate anything, I'm just saying your success, right? You're defining success as, was I at the minimum position?
Okay, yeah, okay.
And I'm just saying success should be profits.
Yeah, no, that's true, I agree.
Whoever you're repricing, not everyone else, just for your pricing.
No, obviously. So that's true, right? I agree with this, but sales occur seldomly. So if you define success as a sale, training your algorithm online will take you probably 2 months. Right?
But I think you said earlier that if you just price weight these observations, nothing would change.
Yes.
Isn't that like a simpler version? That suppose there's
Yes.
every time there's a sale
Yes.
when you're in the low box.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it would, but so where I'm kind of going with this is you want to demand, but then here, I guess in your mind, you have very simple, consumers just come up, show what the price, and buy right there. But you can imagine over time, the consumers themselves are actually monitoring, and they have a pricing tool of themselves of telling us, here's where you are in the minimum, and that's when they jump in to buy. And that's
Okay.
when please change the.
No, this changes the game, but we are talking about consumer mass markets where at least now this is not a reality, right?
I mean, when I go to Amazon, it does tell me where the price is relative to historical.
For what?
It tells me where the current price is, this current price is good relative to historical pricing
To historical prices,
for a particular product, right?
Okay. So
Airline tickets, it's the same.
so then you still have currently you still have like let's say costs to wait until essentially the price.
I was gonna say, there's also the camel site, but you can set it to alert me when the price hits some
Okay.
whatever.
I
I don't know how
didn't-
common
I
you
didn't-
use it.
Okay, we didn't think about this so far. Can you tell me the name of this?
It's like 3 camels, or camel, I didn't think. Sorry, I didn't think it out.
Or you can think of it, one camel with 3 humps.
Okay, this changes the game, definitely. Then this observation or these considerations, we would have to think about it. That's true. So currently we are basically not thinking about the strategic consumer that reacts to this price.
Because I wonder, especially for the commercial repricer, I mean, that might be something that they're potentially looking at.
Perhaps.
They should.
They should definitely, but they should also, yeah. So that's true. So we have to think about this. And then basically we let the commercial repricer play against the XP3, right? And our repricer essentially beats the repricer. So what we want to make sure here, right, is we want to make sure that perhaps the commercial repricer is not good against playing against the Bertrand strategy, but perhaps he's good playing against another artificial intelligence software, and this might essentially help him, and he might be tailored to something that is an artificial intelligence, and essentially he might decide to, he might perform better, right? But here basically we confirm in some sense our findings from before that our repricer seems to be better than the commercial repricer. So these are essentially the results that we have so far, right?
Can I ask about the commercial? Is there a sense in which this is this commercial algorithm as it existed when you bought it, and if I were to now buy the same one, chances are that they would have tweaked the algorithm, or do you have a sense how stable these commercial algorithms are?
If they change over time, you mean? Or
Yeah, 'cause like with a subscription-based service, who knows? Maybe it just changes daily, basically based on what they find. So.
They don't say anything about their algorithms, so it's very difficult to understand what they are doing. Essentially, they're just putting out claims about what they can do, and so my sense is that the algorithm is the algorithm that we use right now is very stable. We have nothing that indicates that changed over time.
Couldn't you play enough against it to try to figure out roughly what his strategy is?
What then?
Couldn't you play enough against it? You know, the pricing strategy, just basically see what does it do? Like, because you could map what does it do to response, or even, you know, try to create your own algorithm you're playing against it. I mean, you're playing against it anyway.
Yeah.
See its responses. Couldn't you at least try to approximate the...
I'm sorry, we are playing against the
Right,
commercial
but can't you
algorithm.
try to now back out what it looks like its strategy? I mean, you're not gonna get it
Yeah,
exactly,
yeah,
but
okay.
suppose it's very simple.
Okay,
Suppose
okay.
it's gonna undercut you by an epsilon, all you have to figure out is what's the epsilon.
Yes.
It seems
No,
to me
no,
you
no,
need
it's,
a
no,
lot
no,
of
no, no,
repetition to figure that out.
it's not that, yeah, we should be able to figure
No,
it
I'm
out.
not saying it is, but I'm saying if it is that simple, you can figure it out very quickly.
It's not that simple. It seems to play, so it seems to be something that is basically, it seems to be a mixed strategy. Sometimes he raises prices, undercuts prices. But it's true, that's something interesting, that would be something interesting to look at. But I think,
But let's go there, you can see what changes it makes. Okay, so first get the support. Okay, and then go back to yours and try to see what are the probabilities that it, you know, it does, and what do those probabilities relate to? I mean, it seems to me like if you play it against it enough, you should be able to.
we should be able to do this. No, that's something that we definitely also plan to do, to understand what is essentially the strategy, right? Our presumption.
It might not be so easy because who knows what the state space is for the algorithm.
Exactly. So
If the state space is more than just the current or most recent prices for competitors, then the space of things gets really big.
Yeah, but you see, you should be able to see that, right? Because
Well, yeah, I mean, you can test it
with
out.
enough repetitions, I mean,
Yeah, so you could-
just think of it as an econometrician, right? I mean,
No,
we
I'm
go
just
on
saying
the-
that you're going to get a continuum as your possibility.
No,
So it's going to be
it's this enough repetitions, the bound on that.
it's going to grow with it with the repetition.
Yeah.
It could, but you know, I think there's a bunch of things you can say, okay, it has support, it seems like it's continuous support. Okay, well now if it's continuous, now what you're trying to fit is a continuous function. Now let me see, is it only conditioning on prices? You could see, I run enough times where the current stuff is the same, but that doesn't seem to be stable. Okay, and now I'm not saying you'll be able to figure it out, but you'll just be able to sort it
Sure,
out.
sure.
I mean, think of it as an econometrician, right? You're basically saying, I'm gonna try to maximize the R squared of the fit of my prediction as a function of what I see in the data. Now, it could be that you'll achieve a very low R squared, or maybe not, but
No, that's
that would
a-
also be interesting to tell you how sophisticated the algorithm is.
yes, definitely. We can also choose this approach. So what we basically take from this result is that the XP tree basically that we implement demonstrate the feasibility, at least, you know, of implementing AI algorithms and to let them learn online, right? So the commercial repricer does not appear to be sophisticated, but of course, you know, maybe the objective that we are testing for is the wrong objective, right? Maybe he's maximizing over a longer time horizon, and maybe he's not myopic, in fact, and then maybe our conclusions are a little bit premature, right? And moreover, you know, these algorithms need to be versatile and basically think about different market situations, right? They need to be ready to compete not only against one player, but 2 players, 3 players. So maybe, you know, maybe our conclusions here would be a little bit, it would be maybe a bit too early to say that he's in fact not a good repricer. So, but at least we think that, you know, in some way we provide some systematic way in, you know, to test, in some sense, the sophistication of algorithms in a myopic setting, right, where you don't have intertemporal trade-offs, okay? Now, our original goal was the goal of collusion, right, and we want to, and of course, collusion requires balancing long versus short-term incentives, okay? And so you need algorithms that are able to solve intertemporal trade-offs to be able to collude. At least, so if you say artificial intelligence algorithms, right? An artificial intelligence algorithm is able to collude, he needs to solve intertemporal trade-offs.
Not necessarily, right? Because I can think of an algorithm as a commitment device.
Okay.
And what I really need are I should commit to a certain simple algorithm and you should commit to
No,
the same simple
exactly. No. I completely agree with this. So that's why I qualified. So if you think about artificial intelligence, that basically is self-learning strategies that learn essentially this commitment and something is the right thing to do, right? Then you need basically to embed, let's say, an intertemporal objective into the algorithm when the algorithm learns. But of course, right? We could think about mechanical rules, and this is maybe something that that's something that we will definitely also do along the project, that basically can, be used as a commitment device in some sense. Exactly. So yes. So if you think about AI and self-learning AI, I mean, one huge problem, of course, is that they need to be versatile. Now, we could basically focus on creating an artificial intelligence algorithm that works well in a collusive setting, but once you let it play against Bertrand, he completely collapses in his performance, right? It's not good, right? You want to have something that is versatile and basically performs well in certain market environments. And then, most importantly, you want the algorithm to learn at reasonable costs, right? You don't want to have an algorithm that basically needs 1 million periods to learn the optimal strategy because no one would use that, right? You want something that very early on performs a reasonable performance. And we want, basically, a side aspect of our project is this even feasible, right? Is this something that we can manage to implement on a real marketplace, given all these constraints? Okay. Now, there's this paper of Galvano et al. That I mentioned in the beginning, and they basically use simulations approach. And for instance, very often, okay, the algorithms learn to collude, right? And the learning periods are like very, very long, 1 million periods and so on and so on. This is, of course, maybe you can think about some settings where this is acceptable, but in general, probably it's not acceptable here if you want to have an online learning algorithm that basically learns an optimal strategy. So what we are asking here is, therefore we are basically now thinking about optimistic queue learnings. Just as a little background, optimistic queue learning is known to be sample efficient, so it learns basically quickly, okay? And the first simple question that we ask ourselves is, okay, can basically optimal queue learner learn the optimal intertemporal strategy against a Bertrand player that basically just myopically undercuts your price, right? Okay. And so now you might ask, okay, what is the optimal intertemporal strategy? Well, the optimal intertemporal strategy is not, the relentless cycler basically sets a high price and goes down to the minimum price and then resets the price, right? Now you might think, okay, if we think about inelastic demand, at least for the moment, okay, that the optimal thing to do is essentially to find the optimal price where you reset, because it will basically balance the trade-off between, losing the buy box when you reset the price, right? But at the same time, it will also guarantee you a higher average price over time, right? So that's basically the intertemporal objective that we are thinking about now. Very simple, but that's what we are thinking about now. And so in other words, basically, we are just asking ourselves, and this is essentially a pilot, can we find the optimal intertemporal version of the relentless cycling strategy, okay? And this is still, very early stage, and we are just using simulations, and we didn't implement it on the real repricer. But what you see here, right, and this I think it's interesting, is that on the left-hand side you see the current reset price that the algorithm learns, right? What is this current reset price? The red line basically shows you what is the theoretical optimal reset price. Okay, what is the theoretical optimum between 265 and 2? When should you reset the cycle in some sense? Right, and you see that the algorithm eventually learns the optimal reset price, right, after 5,000 steps. Now, in practice, this would mean 20 days, okay, and this is already a long period of time. You might not be satisfied with it as a seller. But then if you, look at the right-hand side, you might maybe, this helps you maybe qualify what are actually the costs of this learning period, right? And what you see on the right-hand side is essentially the costs of basically letting this algorithm learn are relatively low, at least compared to the optimal myopic best response against Bertrand strategy, okay? It basically plots if the current reset price, if I would play the current reset price until infinity, what would be basically the ratio between this, playing this reset price or simply cycling down, right? And essentially what we see is that after a few steps, you're already in a region where you basically, on average, would make profit, right? If the algorithm would simply stop there, okay? So let me conclude. So with this,
So that's the positive spin on this. The other more negative spin is the gains aren't that large, if I understood the magnitude.
Yeah. No, the gains are not that large in this setting, but you can, if you think about, so what we basically realize is that if you have long price ranges, so if the difference between the minimum price and the maximum price is large, then these gains become much more substantial. Then we are talking about 20%, right? And usually, right, it jumps over the one-to-one ratio quite early. But this is something, yeah, that this is just an example, and here the gains are.
So the minimum at the cost and the maximum is the monopoly price? Is that?
Sorry?
Minimum is typically the cost and the maximum is the monopoly price? Is that?
Of the price range that we operate in, yes, that's how we think about it. Okay, so yes, so what do we learn from the exercise until now? So we propose a protocol to test the sophistication in myopic settings. We demonstrate, in my opinion, that you can train algorithms that learn something that comes close to the optimal myopic strategy. As an aside, I think it's quite interesting to think about simple mechanical pricing rules and the effect that they have on market outcomes without artificial intelligence as well. And yes, so currently we are working on this optimistic Q-learning approach, and we would like basically to implement it in the real setting to make it also a little bit more versatile, to test whether it would also prevail against different types of strategies that you might think of. And what we also want to do is essentially what you suggested, Rakesh, that we want to basically also start thinking about this mechanical commitment devices in some sense, right? What happens if you basically implement a grim trigger strategy and you let it play against a commercial repricer? Will the commercial repricer at some point, learn to collude, learn that the rational thing to do is to stick at the high price, right? Which is maybe the most straightforward approach to test collusion in this, or the ability to collude in this type of setting.
But now, I would argue the intermediary also has an incentive to implement the collusive outcome, which is if I'm going to charge you to be in the price box, it has to be worth your while, right?
Yes.
And so it would seem to me as the intermediary, with some positive probability, I want to select somebody who's charging the monopoly price.
Yes. But, well, at least what we see in the data right now, it's simply not what they are doing, right?
Which seems puzzling, right? Because
no, but yeah, but I agree, obviously.
and I picked monopoly, but in this story, the intermediary could pick any price between marginal cost and monopoly. So they could divide the surplus between buyers and sellers any way they wish and capture. Yeah.
No, that's a good point. But yeah, it's definitely currently not what they are doing, at least in our setting. Okay, well, thank you very much for your attention, and thanks for the feedback. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just struck by what you said about it's kind of unrealistic for these things to need 10,000 steps to learn how to perform. And I guess it got me wondering, I would expect that they are, using their own product versus their own product, and
Yes,
versus other competitors. And
so they are training their algorithms offline, and they basically then deploy them online. That's definitely something that they could do, right? So from what I have seen, there's a small, basically, literature of people that are engineers and that work for these repricing companies, I think, right? And what they really try to do still is basically to always adapt to the setting that they are deployed in. So they always have an online learning component most of the time. At least that's what the papers that I found basically claim. That's something that we also consider, definitely. What happens if you train an algorithm offline and deploy it on the online marketplace? and you basically do not allow the algorithm anymore to change its parameters, and it just basically fully learns offline all different sorts of scenarios, and then you deploy it. Right? But I think that ultimately the best performance is always achievable when you allow the algorithm to adapt to the idiosyncrasies of every market, right, of every marketplace, and if you allow to learn fully online. But yeah, that's an option.
I guess a related question is what happens when they play themselves? Because I think you've been showing
Yes.
your
No.
algorithm versus
Yes,
them. I'm
yes,
interested if
yes.
there's regularities too.
Yes. No, that's the end game essentially. What happens if they play themselves? Do they learn to collude? Yes.
What is the collusion?
The collusion you would
Because if
basically
you play against someone, there is no
Yeah.
collusion.
No, well, you play against someone and you might learn a collusive strategy, right? And then the way to test collusion is essentially what happens if you deviate from the collusive agreement, right? Does something like a punishment scheme happen, right? Does the other algorithm systematically punish you for deviating from the collusive agreement? And this would be basically, so the way would be you introduce an algorithm, you let them learn, then you observe, let's say, some sort of equilibrium outcome or long-term, equilibrium outcome. And then once you think that the algorithm's finished to learn, you basically test, you introduce a price deviation, right? And you basically check what happens. Does the algorithm really, react to the deviation of the input?
Do you need AI?
You don't necessarily need AI, but the question is, what happens if you introduce repricing softwares everywhere and people use them, right? And would it be realistic as well to assume that that this softwares will basically lead to collusion? You don't need AI to collude, definitely not.
I don't. No.
Okay.
For me, it's more effective. A simple algorithm.
A simple algorithm.
Yeah. To collude rather than training an algorithm to collude.
Yes, I think the idea, the motivation of the research is essentially assume, you introduce this repricing technology and it claims that it uses artificial intelligence, right? How does the status quo in some sense change, right? We cannot say that much about this so we cannot explicitly answer this question, right, by what we are doing, but we try to understand what are the capabilities of this algorithm, and is it likely that it goes in one direction or the other, right? Does the market become more competitive or less competitive?
So I understand why you would want to start with this, but I guess in practice, if you go to the field, there's going to be other players there. Mm-hmm. And so maybe in this sort of lab setting, you could put some noise traders that, with some probability, there's going to be another seller, a third seller that charges some price. Mm-hmm. Because you get sort of this overfitting now going on when you're only having the two algorithms play against each other, and they might not be robust against this noise. Like kind of the first one you showed where the Bertrand guy jumped, and so yes, that'd be interesting to see if there's noise introduced in a. If you do it sort of in a smart way that it still leaves some room for this.
Exactly. You want basically to make sure that this doesn't completely disrupt your algorithm.
Yeah, exactly.
So you would like to see basically robustness tests that when you introduce another seller randomly in the marketplace, not everything falls apart. So that you have something that is still optimal, in some sense optimal to do.
Yeah, because I don't know how these commercial ones, for example, if they can handle that better.
Yes, no, that's definitely important. Yeah, the versatility aspect is very important.